Hey everyone, today we're talking about investing in Utah. If you're new here, make sure you like and subscribe. Today we're talking about investing in Utah. So I personally invest in real estate in Utah, and I've come up with a parameter that I recommend to a lot of my clients. The first thing is to come up with a sandbox of where you want to invest. And what I mean by a sandbox is an area that you know the area well and you can identify properties and find out if they're a good value or not pretty quickly without doing too much extra research. So my particular sandbox is within 40 minutes of my house, so I can drive and check on it without being too big of an inconvenience for me. So even though there's some fantastic deals up in Ogden, I don't personally invest in Ogden because I can't get there quick enough to check on something. I do hire a handyman to do most of my work, so it's not a repair thing, it's more a comfort thing of knowing the neighborhoods and knowing the areas really well. So if something comes up in my sandbox, I can do a quick analysis to decide if I need to write an offer or if it's not the right property for me. The next thing I do is come up with an age criteria of what is best to invest in. I personally like to buy anything newer than 1970 because I'm less likely to have major issues with the house. I'm less likely to have structural issues, roof issues, plumbing, electrical, things like that. And if I do have those issues, because 70s is to the point where the houses need a full renovation, I go over the numbers to make sure that the purchase price makes sense. So the next one from there is how many bedrooms and bathrooms you want. Now, a good rule of thumb is renters pay about $300 per bedroom, so the more bedrooms you have, the better. The downfall of that is the rule around bedrooms in Utah is you can allow up to 2 people per bedroom plus a child. So if you have a 5-bedroom house, you're looking at potentially 11 people living in your property. Now, that's great for rental rate, but that's pretty hard on wear and tear with your property. So those are some pros and cons of the higher square footage houses with the more bedrooms and bathrooms. Now, one thing I really like about the higher square footage and more bedrooms, bathrooms, is you typically get a renter who's less likely going to move a lot. So you're going to have a longer time in between vacancies, and then when you have a vacancy, you can take the time to update, renovate, and get the house ready for the next renter. Now, if you go with the 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, you're going to have a lot more turnover. But if you do a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, typically that's where you want to get a duplex. So then if one unit's vacant, the other one is available. Now, when it comes to investing, you can have up to 4 units in one When it comes to investing, you can have up to 4 units in one loan, which is a conforming loan. Once you have 5 units, then you have to start doing commercial properties, which is a different conversation that we'll have another day. So we're talking about investing with conforming loans. You typically can only have 10 in your name, but if you have 4 units and it's only one loan, then that counts as one loan. So you could potentially have 40 doors because of the 10 limit rule. So there are pros and cons to having multifamily. The thing I have found with Utah and investing in multifamily is a lot of people do it just to offset their mortgage. So they'll buy a duplex, rent out half of it, but not do the math of if they moved out, would the property still cash flow? So you want to make sure you're doing the math on the purchase price, especially because we do have that weird variable in Utah. So conventional conforming loan limits, they do price properties the same way a single family is, meaning that the property has to have a comparable and an appraiser is going to come out and look at the comparables to make sure it's worth it. So that does help control a little bit. Once you get into the commercial financing, it's more about the property and what the property's cash flow is on what the lender's going to lend on the property. And you typically have to have a much larger down payment, 20 to 25%. When it comes to investing in single family or multifamily under 4 units, you can potentially move into it and buy one with 3.5% down using an FHA loan. Those are harder to come by, and the math to make sure that they still cash flow is always tricky, but there are ways to jump into investing in Utah without a large down payment. So the next thing I recommend is making sure you have enough reserves in place for any repairs. When it comes to reserves, a good rule of thumb is 1% of the rent amount for the whole entire year. If you keep that in reserves, that will typically cover most of the repairs that are going to come up in any given year, depending on the property. Now, if you buy a property that needs a ton of work, you're probably going to spend a lot more in repairs. So what I like to do is called a forced depreciation property purchase. So what we do is we go in and buy something that needs some work, and we do an inspection and we fix everything that comes out in that inspection. That way, when I put a renter in the property, I'm not gonna have to have a bunch of calls from my renter saying, hey, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed, because I already went through and did all of that. And I put that as part of my acquisition cost to make sure that the numbers still make sense when it comes to cash on cash return and cash flow. Now, I get asked this question all the time. Does it make more sense to go for a higher cash on cash return or to go for a cash flow? This really ultimately comes down to your long-term goals. And what I mean by that is your long-term goal to add value, sell the property, buy another property, and roll up your portfolio so you have a large multi-million-dollar property that has a lot more doors so you can offset vacancies? Or is your goal just to own 10 properties that you're gonna pay off? If that's the case, you're gonna probably wanna go for cash flow. Now, if you're looking for appreciation, cash on cash return is really where the money is made in real estate. So I like to ask the question of what is your 5-year goal, your 10-year goal, and how can we structure to get you to that point? I personally buy rental properties for my own investment to be a retirement option for me. So I'm looking more for cash flow and then taking that cash flow and reinvesting it into more properties. So then by the time I do retire, I'll have enough cash flow to comfortably live, because as a real estate agent, I don't have a portfolio for retirement for a 401k. Yes, I can do a self-directed IRA, but that's, again, not the topic of the day. The next thing is you want to make sure you're calculating for property management and vacancy. Now, property management in Utah ranges anywhere from 6% up to 10%. You typically get a bigger discount the more doors you have. So if you have 5 doors plus, you might get a 6% rate versus a 10%. Now, you don't necessarily have to hire a property manager. In the state of Utah, you can manage your own properties, but if you hire someone else to do your management, they do have to be licensed as a real estate agent. So I always factor that into it because I know someday I'll want to turn them over. For now, I still manage my own properties because it's not too hard, and I'm available to answer the phone basically 24/7 because I am a realtor and that's what I'm paid to do. So when it comes to vacancy ratings in Utah right now are super low because we have way more people looking for properties to rent than properties available. So the average is about 3% vacancy. So what that means is of all the 365 days, the property is going to be vacant about 3% of those days. And what I have found is they're only vacant because I don't turn my properties fast enough. So if you hire or if you manage correctly, you'll be able to have your renter move out, be vacant for a day for a clean out, maybe change the locks, and get your new renter in there. Now that takes a little bit of time on management, so that's where I fail because also I'm super busy, so I can't manage it as tightly as I would like. But when it comes down to it, it's your investment property and you get to make all of these decisions. Now, the last thing I want to cover is the 3 tips I use to find renters, because that is probably the biggest thing most people are concerned about. The number 1 tip I use is their income needs to be 3 times the amount of my rental rate. Because if they run into a financial hardship, it'll be a whole lot easier to continue to pay their rent if they're not spending more than 30% of their income on their housing. The second one is no evictions whatsoever. Because in the great state of Utah, it is really, really hard to actually get an eviction on your record. So you have to be a big pain in the butt to get an eviction on your record. Now, I do get calls from people who have evictions from out of state, and I'll listen to what they got evicted, but I still have yet to find a story that's good enough to rent to someone who's been evicted. And then the last one is credit score, and that typically is anything above 600. Once you have a credit score below 600, that is because you typically have done something that has derogatory terms on your credit score, meaning missed payments, late payments, bankruptcy, stuff like that. Now, I do rent to people with bankruptcy because that is a spot where they're in a tough spot and they're gonna have bad credit, but I typically just require a higher deposit if they do have a credit score below 600. So if you're looking to invest in Utah and you want more information than just this video can cover, or you want more personal questions answered, feel free to reach out to me here. I love helping people start investing, and I have plenty of seasoned investors that tell me exactly what they want and we go get it. So wherever you are on the spectrum of investing, reach out. I would love to be your guide.